I might have to read it in a manner to say that there is a scope for adding a word or deleting a word there, at least in terms of a charging section. So 265, the supreme law in India, that is the Constitution of India, clearly brings out that the authority of law, which descends again from the Constitution of India, whatever authority has been given, the subject matter, the object for which the law needs to be basically made, from that this levy and collection would come forward. We would discuss what is levy, what is collection, what follows, what can this should be read as together or they are different from each other. We would come to that. Then we have 246A, all of us again are aware about it. Through which basically we have GST in India, where the powers have been given to the parliament and again to the state legislature to make form laws in respect of goods and services tax, and specifically then in respect of all the transactions on which tax needs to be levied, which are treated as transaction taking place in course of interstate trade and commerce. There parliament only has the exclusive right. I would not go into details of this because that's not the topic here, but basically when we go to 9, it's very important that we are aware about that this is the background in which we are reading the 9, that the authority of law, whatever we talk about in terms of charging section, the Constitution of India itself says that it has to be absolutely clear and nothing should go beyond that. Now there are two judgments. Again, all of us who have been taking sessions or otherwise, we are aware of these two judgments, which talks about that what are the pillars of taxation. So we have this Mathuram Agarwal and another judgment, Govind Saran Ganga Saran judgment. Both of them brings out that whenever you are reading about any components of a tax law or tax statute, and specifically when we are reading the levy, 2-3 ingredients basis which one when you or principles basis which when you read the levy provisions, they have to come out very clearly to you. When you read this Mathuram Agarwal judgment, which was regarding basically levy of municipal taxes there arising from the Madhya Pradesh, there the Honorable Supreme Court said that whenever you would read it, three things are important. What is the subject matter of tax? And this would actually form the premise when we would move forward. What is subject to subject matter of tax? Second, who is the person who is liable to make the payment of tax or the person liable to pay tax? And third, the rate at which the tax needs to be paid. When you would read this with Govind Saran Ganga Saran, it would also talk about the measure of tax, which to my understanding is actually incorporated or is to be read when you are talking about the rate. That rate is basically the function or the tax is basically the function of the value and the rate which is there, and hence the measure has to be read in accordance with what is the subject matter of the tax there. So what are we taxing? What are we taxing would actually determine, or the next step to that would technically be that whatever object is in mind to tax, the valuation of it has to be accordingly. Second, once we do that on that particular value, what is the applicable rate of tax? And then whenever you would talk about the applicable rate of tax, it has to be at a given point of time when the taxable event is arising. And then next and the most important aspect is there would be to identify who is that person who would be basically required or liable to pay the tax in that case. And in both the judgments, the Honorable Supreme Court has clearly held that in case there is ambiguity in any of these 3-4 ingredients, then one would say that probably that tax statute cannot stand on its own legs. Now, with this, let's come to CGST Act. And again, before we go to Section 9, and we start with our posers, it's important that we read two definitions and along with that one definition of central tax which is given. So when you read 2108, it says taxable supply, and that's what basically we want to read when we are reading Section 9, that what is that component or what is that subject matter we are looking at. And it says taxable supply means, so it's a definitive definition, means a supply of goods or services or both, which is leviable to tax under this act. So again, we see the word leviable is there. And then very interestingly, they're using the word under this act. Again, for reference, as of now, we are only reading CGST Act. We are not definitely going to IGST Act today. And we are understanding that whatever we are reading in CGST, that is also there in SGST and UTGST. So it's a definition given under CGST Act. which says taxable supply means supply of goods or services or both, which is leviable to tax under this act. That's point number one. Then the opposite to that is a non-taxable supply, means a supply of goods or service or both, which is not leviable to tax under this act. And then there is an inclusion there, addition there, or under the IGST Act. Okay. So one thing, when you read this, it comes out that when we would look at the levy provisions under Section 9, it says that whatever is leviable to tax under the provisions of CGST Act would be treated as a taxable supply. It does not have a reference to what is leviable to tax under IGST Act. Why would be a question which I will ask to all of you for an answer. And then the second aspect, when you read non-taxable supplies, it has reference to what is not leviable under CGST, not leviable tax under IGST. And then both of them, there is a word or which is mentioned in the definition. The word and is not there. So what is the meaning of this in this regard? So I hope I'm able to make it very clear that what I'm trying to basically say in terms of when we read taxable and non-taxable, that there is certain additions of the words which is there when you talk about non-taxable. One would understand that what is not taxable would automatically become what is not included or what doesn't fit into the definition of taxable supply would automatically fit into the definition of non-taxable supply. But when you literally read the definition, it looks like that there are certain additions which are there. Is this has been done deliberately? Is there a purpose behind it? Or was it not required to be done at all? Or it was just out of conservative approach, these words have been mentioned here. And then third, when we talk about central tax, they say central tax means central goods and services tax, which is levied under Section 9. So that means it is very clear that all these three, they are interlinked with each other with a word which is called as levy. And hence that is why now we can come to provision of Section 9, subsection 1. And again, we have 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Before I start, the background in which basically I would read it or I would ask, probably my doubt to all of you would be that how the heading of the section says levy and collection of GST. Now, clearly under the subsections, there would not be any bifurcation that this subsection is only related to levy. And 2, 3, 4, 5 are related to, or let's say 1 and 2, subsection 1 and subsection 2 are related to levy, and 3, 4, 5 are related to collection. Or is it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them are related to levy provisions? Or is it like that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them have ingredients of levy of tax and has about the collection of tax? Okay. So when we would read this, again, this thought has to be kept in mind that in which background we are reading this. Okay, let's read, all of us, let's read it together. 9 subsection 1. Subject to provisions of subsection 2, there shall be levied a tax called Central Goods and Services Tax on all intrastate, and all color coding, we would spend some reasonable amount of time on all the color codings. On all intrastate supplies of goods or services or both, except on the supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption, on the value determined under Section 15, and at such rates not exceeding 20%, as may be notified by the government on the recommendation of the council, and collected in such manner as may be prescribed, and shall be paid by the taxable person. So you see, then at last we have two ands. One and is talking about the collection, and the another and is talking about the person who is basically liable to pay the tax. And when we would read this, it talks about what is being taxed here. It is all intrastate supplies of goods or services or both. So that when you look at filling those blanks which arises from those two landmark judgments from the Honorable Supreme Court, Mathuram Agarwal and Govind Saran Gangasaran, one thing is very clear, that subject matter, we have intrastate supplies of goods or services, where the exception is that out of those, whatever fits into that definition, you take out a supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption, be it you treat it as a supply of goods or whatever be that be the case, but at least from the levy perspective, that is excluded here. The person who is liable to make payment of tax is clearly a taxable person. And for the applicable rate of tax, it clearly says that there is an outer rate of 20% given under the provision 9(1), and then they say the actual rate is going to be notified by the government, and the recommendation has to come from the council there. Now 9(1) is subject to 9(2). So let's read 9(2) and then we'll come to the questions. That because 9(1) was subject to 9(2), so we have to read 2, and there are certain supplies, specifically the central tax on supply of petroleum crude, high-speed diesel, motor spirit, commonly known as petrol, natural gas, and aviation turbine fuel, shall be levied with effect from such date as may be notified by government on the recommendation of the council, meaning thereby that when you would read the general meaning of the supplies of goods or services or both, one would be able to understand that all these are included within the scope. But because 9(1) is subject to 9(2), and when you would read it together, it clearly comes out that sorry, it clearly comes out that for the time being, till the time the government is not bringing in a notification to include them within the scope of 9(1), till that time they would be excluded from the scope, they would be excluded from the levy, and hence that subject matter to that extent is very clear, that whenever we talk about intrastate supply of goods or services, in terms of supply of goods, there would be an exclusion of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Then alcoholic liquor for human consumption outright rejected or outright excluded, and temporarily petroleum crude, high-speed diesel, motor spirit, and natural gas and aviation turbine fuel are excluded till the time through a notification and whatever procedure that needs to be followed, they are included from a given date. Now, in this, let's first of all come to this question. We saw a word called as intrastate supplies of goods or services or both. So the first point where we would basically see is what is intrastate. And again, we have definition of intrastate supply of goods and intrastate supply of services given under 264 and 265, which refers to Section 8 of the IGST Act, where Section 8 of the IGST Act helps us to determine that what would be treated as an intrastate supply of goods and intrastate supply of service, which is, again, when you read 8, it says it is a function of location of supplier and the place of a supplier, both in terms of goods and both in terms of services. And then it has certain exceptions. Again, we would not go there. So at least we have very clear basis to identify what is intrastate. For that, it is not there in the CGST Act. It is there in the IGST Act. And one need not actually contemplate to identify what is the meaning of word intrastate. It clearly refers to Section 8, and hence we have to basically import whatever interpretation we draw from the provision of Section 8 to identify what is intrastate. So that's not a problem. Now, my question to all of you, we saw the definition of word taxable supply. We saw we have a definition of intrastate, which is given under the CGST Act. The reference of that is there in 9(1) also. When we read Section 24, and there we say that there are certain people who are compulsorily required to take the registration. And when we see that 24(1) says person making an interstate taxable supply. Okay, this phrase is there under CGST Act. Taxable supply we have already read. Interestingly, there is no definition of word interstate which is given under CGST and IGST both. At least I could not find the definition under CGST and IGST. So my question to all of you would be, once they say taxable is leviable to tax under this act, we do not have definition of interstate. What is the actual meaning of interstate taxable supplies under CGST? Or for what purpose it has been mentioned here? Because taxable supplies under CGST, one would look at it and you read 9(1), it talks about intrastate. So why have they used the word interstate taxable supplies under Section 24, subsection 1? What is the reason behind it? I'm sure it's a very simple question to all of you, but this question needs to be answered before we move further. Anybody? Anybody would like to I hope my question was clear. In case I have to repeat, I'll do that. What is the meaning of this interstate taxable supply under CGST?
You are focusing more on the word taxable, or you are focusing more on the word interstate?
I am talking about the complete phrase interstate taxable supplies.
Well, what I have understood when I read this particular point was that since making exempt supplies was not compulsory liable to be registration under Section 24 because of Section 23, that is why I think they have specifically used the word taxable interstate supply.
Okay. 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 So you're saying that's the purpose behind it. Okay. Nitinji is saying that as per the constitutional levy, it is intrastate supply remains only with the center. That's why they have mentioned here. Okay, let me refine my question. I am saying we have a definition of a taxable supply, which is leviable to tax under this act. When we read 9.1 says that we're talking the levy is in context of intrastate supply of goods and services. So taxable supply, to that extent, we understand that in context of CGST Act, it is talking about an intrastate supply of goods or services. When two words are preceding this word taxable supply, interstate, is this a contradiction? That we as interstate not defined, interstate and intrastate are obviously not synonyms to each other. And when you talk about taxable supply being leviable under Section 9, then they are using interstate taxable supply, where taxable supply actually under CGST is an intrastate supply of goods or service. So is this phrase written not in context of CGST Act, but still written in the CGST Act? Or does this have any connection or any meaning only arising out of CGST Act? That's what basically I'm trying to ask.
Section 5 of the IGST Act specifically deals with levy on IGST.
Correct,
and therefore.
Okay. So that means this taxable supply word, absolutely right. And that's what madam is saying. So this taxable supply definition, which is given here under the CGST, this taxable supply definition says, which is leviable to tax under this act. This act, when we are reading with two words before that, it is interstate. The act has to be read as IGST Act. Is my understanding correct? Because I can't read CGST Act, the definition of taxable supply only in the context of CGST Act and then read interstate. Because interstate is not defined under CGST Act.
Can we read this section 2, subsection 120, which states that words and expression used and not defined in this act, but defined in IGST Act, shall have the same meaning as assigned to them in those acts.
Right,
So,
madam?
can we refer this also?
Yes, definitely we can do that. But the word taxable supply is not defined under IGST Act. So
yes. Whether we have to read all the four words together or we can have interstate and taxable supply separately.
We can, in my view, yes, we can do that. In fact, when we clearly have a meaning of word taxable supply given here, in my view, interstate should be read as one and taxable supply has to be read separately as the second aspect to that. But then when I do that, it looks like that there is contradiction here. So I'll give my view, and probably then others may chip in case you want to add something to the supplementary or maybe contradict to what I'm saying. When we look at, let's say, the definition of aggregate turnover also, aggregate turnover, when we look at it, it's the aggregate value of all taxable supplies. Again, it is only given under the CGST Act. Exempt supplies, export of goods or services of both, and intrastate supplies of person having same PAN. So this intrastate supplies of person having same PAN, to my understanding, is basically only talking about the transaction between two distinct persons, but it is not talking about intrastate supplies in general. Now, what I understand from this is that this sentence which is mentioned here, it is only in the context of IGST Act, and it has nothing to do with the provisions of CGST Act, for a very simple reason. Then when we go to IGST Act, IGST says words and expression used and not defined under this act but defined under CGST Act, or this compensation says shall have the same meaning and as assigned to them under those act. Okay. Now, when you talk about assigned to them under those act, if there is a definite meaning of the word which has been assigned to taxable supply, which will be able to tax under this act, one way to look at is would be that this act, now you have to read it in context of the IGST Act, and IGST is actually applicable on interstate supplies, and hence that taxable supply would actually take the meaning from the IGST Act, and that is why it is under 24(1) it is mentioned here. One would also look at the provision of section 20 of the IGST Act, which says supply to the provision of this act and rules made thereunder, the provisions of CGST Act relating to registration shall mutatis mutandis, and this mutatis mutandis would basically say with the natural variation required to keep the main meaning intact, so far as may be in relation to integrated tax, as they apply in relation to central tax, as if they are enacted under this act. My understanding is, if we do not read this taxable supply only in the context of IGST Act, then probably there would be unnecessary confusion which would be coming out. So the definition of taxable supply, which is mentioned under section 2, which says leviable to tax under this act, that this act has to be read as IGST Act, and then when you would read it, it would look only proper. Hence, this 24(1), whatever it says, it has nothing to do with the levy provisions which are there under section 9. It has nothing to do at all with anything which is mentioned under CGST Act, and all of this has to be imported as it is from the IGST Act. This has been made effectively only for the purpose of registration when you would talk about taxable person there. I am bringing it here along with levy of section 9 under CGST Act, because if I don't do that, in my view, there can be certain unnecessary complications which may arise when you would look at the provisions and try to fix the meaning of this from the reference on the CGST Act only. That's my understanding. Okay. Let me ask another question here. In case somebody wants to add or basically say something else, you're most welcome to do that. Now, if that being the case, let's go back to the definition of non-taxable supply, which was mentioned. If what I am saying makes sense, then why in case of non-taxable supply, they had to write means a supply of goods or service or both, which is not leviable to tax under this act or under IGST Act? Was there a requirement to add this or? If whatever understanding we are drawing from leviable to tax under this act, we could have done that in terms of non-taxable supply, and the full stop would have been there under this act in case of non-taxable, and this or part was not required. Then why probably in the wisdom of the legislature they added this or under IGST Act while referring to non-taxable supply? That's question number 1. And question number 2, is this or should be read as and? If you read this as or, will this bring any unnecessary complication?
I feel yes, non-taxable supply, they have written IGST in view of section 7. Because some of the supplies wherein the recipient might be here, but the supplier and the place of supply might be outside, then in that case, it would be a taxable supply, but due to supplier and recipient being outside, supply and place of supply outside, it would be a non-taxable supply.
Okay. Okay.
This might be one of the reason, as I can understand.
Okay. 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 So
because
that's
if we see the exemption notification.
Yes.
Exemption notification 9/2017. There is a specific entry in entry number 10, services received from a provider of service located in non-taxable territory by a person located in non-taxable territory.
Correct. Correct. Okay. So you're saying,
and that's why they have written or.
Okay. But should this not have been and, Arpitji?
See, it was a taxable supply of goods or services as per section 7. But due to place of supply provisions or location of recipient of section 7 of IGST Act, it has become a non-taxable supply.
Okay. Okay. But again, just to be a devil's advocate, when I am reading section 7 is only in context of scope of supply. Whether a supply is taxable or not, for that I would read either 9(1) or I would read section 5 of the IGST Act. So 7 is only about what determines the scope of supply. taxability, non-taxability of that is not flowing from section 7 of the
No,
CGST.
I'm just referring section 7 for the part. There are three things: location of supplier, recipient, and place of supply.
Okay.
So supposedly recipient is here, but location of supplier and place of supply is outside.
Right.
So
Okay.
how to tax in that case?
Okay. So that's why you think that
No, I am just analyzing to the limited time I have got to analyze the query raised by you. I am just only adding. Just adding value to the query, not
Okay.
giving a definitive answer.
Okay. Got your
Sir,
point.
is it because export of goods and export of services are defined under IGST Act
That is
and
why
therefore non-taxable? Yeah,
okay.
is also referring to the Integrated Goods and Service Tax Act.
Okay. So probably for that purpose they would have done that. Okay. My purpose of asking this question was when you read 2108 and 278, it looks like that whatever analogy one is drawing while reading 2108 to say that in taxable supply, why have they not added or under the Integrated Goods and
Correct.
Services Tax as a taxable supply? And what was the purpose of adding or under the IGST Act under non-taxable supply? And if they really wanted to be conservative here in terms of non-taxable supply, why or it should have been and something which is the non-taxable supply under CGST and IGST both, technically that should only be a non-taxable supply. If something which is leviable to tax under CGST, definitely that is not leviable to tax under IGST. So now if I'm reading non-taxable supply, it means that something which is a taxable supply under CGST is a non-taxable supply under IGST, and hence that means every supply has two aspects. One is taxable and another aspect as non-taxable under IGST. Is that what we are trying to say here? Or the analogy which I gave earlier while reading taxable supply, that when I was referring to interstate taxable supply, and I said all of this is only for the purpose of IGST Act, and then this act word which is mentioned in 2108, this act, my understanding was that if I have to make it workable, this act I will read contextually to say IGST only, then they could have stopped here in terms of not leviable to tax under this act and not move forward. This contradiction in terms of taxable and non-taxable supply, I could not
Yes.
find a definitive answer. Yes.
Probably I'll extend a bit your point, and you're right in my humble opinion that this or term is creating a problem. A very same supply is a taxable supply and maybe treated as because of this or it can get covered in the non-taxable as well. अगर यहाँ पर ये end होता, then it would have been great कि दोनों जगह नहीं है, then it is fine. Or probably 108 में अगर और होता, or then it would have made more sense. And please mind this non-taxable is also a definition under the CGST Act.
CGST Act, correct.
Which is applied to that.
Correct.
But ultimately, these all clauses are the definition clauses. So we will have to go back contextually. We cannot be very, very strict about all of them.
No, I am not being strict. Then the problem is when you apply these, when you use these phrases in terms of ITC reversal, in terms of aggregate turnover, in terms of taxable supply, then these questions would come in mind. Should I include this notional value? Should I not include the notional value?
There only I am saying then we have to go back contextually.
Correct.
We
So
cannot
probably
apply these definition in a very, very strict sense, or maybe if some ambiguity is coming out of it, it has to be contextually applied.
So as Jatinji said, if ambiguity is coming out of it, contextually we have to apply this. But mind you, when we would leave the levy provisions, if at all any ambiguity arises, then in that case, we definitely go forward and say that levy probably would not sustain in that case. At least up till now, whatever we have read in section 9.
Hello. Yes, एक minute. You have identified this ambiguity in this definition clauses and probably in section 24, correct?
Correct.
Levy में आपने कहाँ पर कोई ambiguity identify की है?
Correct. I was coming to that. Though that is not my topic for today, but when you would read section, let me just complete for a minute. When you would read section 5 of the IGST Act, there also the tax that needs to be paid by is a taxable person. And there the taxable person definition is arising from the CGST Act. Though we haven't read as of now taxable person definition in the CGST, but all of us know somebody who's registered under section 22 or 24. There in IGST, when you would read 24, and you would come to identify that when I'm making an intrastate supply, under which provision I am required to take the registration. And there, if the question would come, it has to be 24(1). Then that question would come that how will I interpret 24(1) there? It has to be only in context of IGST. Do I have to read 24(1), or it has some meaning under CGST also? That was the purpose of basically bringing it here to complete the discussion which I was trying to make. Okay, somebody else was saying something. Sorry, I interrupted you in between.
Yes, maybe it can be because of the import of goods and import of services, because these are the kind of transactions which are not at par so far as the IGST and CGST law is concerned. And if you are taking the import of goods, or say the import of service out of the levy, so that can be a transaction which can be non-taxable only with reference to IGST law only, and not CGST.
Not CGST. Correct. Okay.
So maybe the simile that we are trying to draw is the definition clause that the words used herein will be used there, or used in the IGST will be used here. So import can be one category of transaction which can, insofar as IGST law is concerned, can draw a bit distinction.
Absolutely. So I agree.
Do you want to say this can be treated as taxable in CGST?
No. Yash is talking about with reference to non-taxable supply. So whether there can be certain transactions which can be non-taxable only because the words used are or.
Correct.
And not and. So whether there can be a case where a transaction is a supply only with reference to IGST law and not CGST law.
Okay.
So I think import can be one example.
Okay. Okay. Though my issue was not in that regard, but maybe you're raising a point here. But let's move forward, at least on this aspect, that I wanted to explain that there is the manner in which these two definitions are written, there is a difference here. But still, for section 9(1), we are lucky that we have a definition of intrastate supply, and that intrastate supply of goods or intrastate supply of service, and it is an absolutely clear definition. We do not have a problem there. Okay. Now let's come to supply. When it talks about intrastate supply of goods or intrastate supply of services, or both. When we talk about supply, I would not go into detail. We know that in section 7, under the scope, we have all these words which have a reference, which have a meaning. I'm sure all of us have gone through it in our earlier sessions also. The form of supply, what is goods, what is service, what is consideration, what is covered in Schedule 1, consideration, the transactions or activities without consideration, and activities in course of business or furtherance of business. And all of them, it has to be read as all ingredients or the scope of supply that determines that what is a supply. Only simple question, when we are doing that, while determining what is intrastate supply of goods and intrastate supply of service, from whose context we have to read this? It has to be read from a supplier's perspective or recipient's perspective, or both. Anybody who would like to say it has to be read from perspective of both supplier or from the supplier receiver, maybe you can unmute yourself or maybe bring your point. Else, I understand probably majority would have a viewpoint to say that we are reading it from a supplier's perspective. Anybody would like to say that it should be read from the perspective of both supplier and recipient both?
When you are doing a B2B transaction, that means it is both the persons will come into play, both the supplier as well as the recipient.
Okay.
Otherwise, then there won't be any unanimity. So for any supply, there are two aspects: one from the recipient angle, another from the supplier angle, but both has to coincide. Otherwise, the transaction will not be complete.
So my question is, sir, when I'm reading 9(1) and it says intrastate supply of services, for example, And in the scope of supply, when you read under section 7, it says it should be for a consideration in course of business. It has to be in course of business for both supplier and receiver. Then only it would be treated as a supply of service and would fall under the levy provision.
Correct, correct.
Okay.
No, need not be, right?
Yeah.
It is only
When
from
I'm
the
doing a
supplier
business-
perspective.
Yes, sorry, madam, you were saying something.
No, in the course of furtherance of business is only from the supplier perspective.
Right. So that's my view also. Arupji was saying something.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Soumya ma'am was saying. That is the same view as you are sharing. It will be from the supplier's perspective because in this kind of transaction, I am selling the gold to the customer. Gold for him is not for in furtherance of business, but for me it's in furtherance.
Correct, correct. And just to again, to Sir's point, he said that in case of B2B, he specifically made a reference to B2B. In case of B2B also, there can be a possibility that from a recipient's perspective, it may be a transaction which may not be in course and furtherance of business of the recipient. Just because the recipient is registered, that may not mean that the transaction would be in course and furtherance of business of the recipient. It can still be a possibility that would not be for the, it can be for a non-business purpose. Hence, when you look at the levy provisions, very stringent, it has to be looked from a supplier's perspective. Now, this aspect is very important because when we would go to 9.3, 9.4 and all of these things, this aspect would come back again. Okay. Now, let's talk about taxable event. As we are saying, it is an intrastate supply of goods or service. Let me ask a question to all of you. All of us know that in Schedule 2, certain types of transfers, it has been specified whether it is a supply of goods or supply of service. If there is a transfer of title in goods, it's a supply of goods. If it is a transfer of right in goods or undivided share in goods, it's a supply of service. There is a transfer of right to use any goods, it's a supply of service, and so on and so forth. Let's say somebody entered into an agreement for a leasing of a machine where the transfer of right to use was given and the agreement was entered on 1st of April 2017. It was for a period of 12 years and lease rentals were decided 2 lakh rupees per month. Under the erstwhile VAT regime, all of us know it was a deemed sales and it was leviable to VAT only, that is state tax specifically. Under GST, when you look at it, it's a supply of service. Now the question is it leviable to tax under GST? In a sense, in the month of October 2023, if let's say I am that person who had given this machine on lease on 1st of April 2017, and I'm receiving 2 lakh rupees in this month, am I required to pay any GST on the same? Or am I covered by the levy provisions? The taxable event has happened prior to 1/7/2017, or is it occurring continuously every time? Okay. So Soumya ji is saying that yes, it is leviable to GST. Okay. Anybody has a different view on this? Okay. If let's say this was a case where I would have sold that machinery for, let's say, 20 crore rupees on 1st of April 2017, and I would have asked that person to make payments to me on an installment basis, then in that case also the answer would have remained same. Mind you, that was also treated as sale of goods under under erstwhile VAT regime, and under GST regime also it is treated as sale of goods. Whether the levy would have been there in that case also, it was a pure sale transaction which would have taken place on 1st of April 2017. No. So Nitin is saying probably no, not in that case. But if something was leviable to VAT at the time when transaction was undertaken, at that point of time, and that event of deemed sale has occurred prior to GST, and the considerations are delayed, or let's say over a period of time they are being made, can we say the taxable event did not arose prior to 1/7/2017? Okay, Swamiji, can you unmute and probably give your views, maybe benefit of all the participants?
Yeah, I was thinking in view of 174, it would still be taxable under GST.
Okay, but before reading 174, should we not read levy provisions under GST? Then only we should go to 174.
Yeah, I think first it should be levy and then only
Correct.
174.
So that's what we are doing, a very simplistic thing. When has the taxable event arose? The taxable event has arose post implementation of GST, that is after 1/7/2017, or has it arose prior to 1/7/2017? That's the first question.
Prior to.
Prior
Yeah.
to. Now, if the taxable event has arose prior to 1/7/2017, and as what we are understanding from the levy's perspective, that once the taxable event is not within the four corners of that pillars of taxation which we're talking about, then something which is not covered by provisions of Section 9 can indirectly be brought to tax by looking at the repeal and saving provisions in terms of Section 174 of the CGST Act. That is one aspect that needs to be pondered, that is my levy subject to other provisions of the Act, or whether the other provisions of the Act are subject to the levy provisions. If my levy is subject to other provisions of the Act, then probably that charging section in itself, in my view, has a default, has some sort of an anomaly there, because then in that case, the four ingredients which we are talking about, they are not being satisfied here. In fact, when you look at the Supreme Court 20th century case, which was again in respect of this deemed sales transaction only, technically they said that the sale has happened on the day on which this transaction was entered between both of them. That's number one. Somebody referred to 142.11. I think Vinamriji referred to 142.11. Probably 142.11, one would look at it and they say ki, maybe we would have an advantage here. It says notwithstanding anything contained in Section 12. So first it refers to Section 12. It has nowhere reference to Section 9. No tax shall be payable on goods under this Act. So they are talking about tax on goods under this Act, whereas it is a transaction of supply of service under this Act, to the extent tax was leviable on said goods under the value-added tax of the state. So in my understanding, probably 142.11 again would not come into picture, because it is talking about tax payable on goods. This is not a transaction. If at all it is a transaction under GST, supply under GST, it's a supply of service under GST. Again, 142.11b would also not help, because tax that talks about service tax there. 174, in my view, only takes care of that what would be saved in terms of what has already happened in the earlier laws. When you refer to Section 6 of the General Clauses Act also, it talks about rights, obligations, and everything which could be preserved in terms of what has already occurred in terms of the earlier laws. So maybe the argument should be technically otherwise, to say that maybe on this 2 lakh rupees, if at all there could have been any levy, there should have been levy of VAT, but not GST. That's my humble understanding, that it is that taxable event has arose beyond the levy provisions which are there in 9(1), and hence it cannot be brought to tax under GST. Okay, anybody would like to add something, or maybe?
But sir, we are still receiving,
I just want to.
he's still giving 2 lakhs per month every month for the next 12 years.
Very
right?
good, you brought this point, madam, and you will help me to take it to the collection side of it. But before that, I think Jatinji was saying something.
I just want to understand. Someone brought the point that it is saved by 174. Which clause of 174? Maybe I skipped, or I could not understand that.
And
Rest everything is fine. Whatever you have discussed is very finely you discussed, but I could not understand that. Which clause of 174 saves this particularly under the GST or enables? Because it's only a repeal and saving clause. It's not like levy provision. Someone from participants, I think, referred 174.
Yeah, I was looking at subclause C, sir. Affect
Okay.
any right,
Welcome.
obligation, liability acquired, accrued, or incurred under the amended or appealed Act, or orders
just
under the appealed or amended Act.
Just a minute. So आप whatever the terms आपने अभी use किया ना, liability accrued, एक बार उसके ऊपर टेस्ट करके देखिए इसको. Hello.
Sorry, I was disconnected.
What you said is all affects rights, privilege, obligation, or liability, correct? acquired, accrued, incurred. So please इन 3 verbs के ऊपर आप टेस्ट करके देखिए क्या ये ट्रांजेक्शन किसी भी तरीके से लेवी का राइट दे रहा है.
No.
Whether levy or to answer this question, one way is the way Yash dealt it. कि go for the levy provision, क्या वो right दे रहा है. The other way is this 174(2)(c), whether it is giving any right or maybe privilege or liability which is acquired, whether liability towards GST was acquired by the department or something, accrued or incurred under the earlier law. Answer is yes or no.
No.
Yes.
How come 174 come into
Yes.
to that recourse?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
you
Yes,
refer to you refer to 142(11)(a) and 11(b). Now,
Yes, sir.
this is a case where the transaction was treated as a deemed supply under VAT, but now it is a service under GST.
Correct.
That is the case. Now, 142(11)(c) says where tax was paid on supply, you considered A and B. Since A is applicable where earlier it was goods and now it is goods, so our case will not be covered here. B will not be applicable because it will be applicable only where both before GST and post GST it was a service. Now, if we come to C, it says where tax was paid on any supply both under VAT and chapter V of the Finance Act. Okay. Now you say C will be applicable on only when the tax is paid on both these and not
Correct.
either of these.
Correct.
Even that is my view, sir. That's only for works contract, basically.
Okay, got.
In fact, if you are talking about C, that is kind of if you have unnecessarily paid the taxes under VAT law.
Correct.
In my humble opinion, it comes into picture that way. It is not even payable or leviable. It is paid.
So that's what we're
It was-
discussing. That to the extent supplies are made after appointed date. What basically we're trying to say that supply has already not supply rather the sale has already happened prior to 1/7/2017,
Yes.
and there is nothing left which is left to be done.
Yes, one second. This clause B 142(11)(b, I could not understand कि ये services की जब बात कर रहे हैं, so services, why we are discussing कि services in you cannot treat this as a line in 142(11)(b because जब service word यहाँ use हो रहा है, so we will have to go by this law.
No,
So
but
we have to-
142(11)(b) says, yeah, you're right. It says payable on services under this act to the extent tax was leviable on said service under Chapter 5 of the Finance Act.
Okay,
There
so
was
due to
no
second
tax
limb,
levied.
okay, fine. So due to second limb of this provision, you are taking it out. Okay.
Correct.
To be very honest, I think this thing was not envisaged. That's something which was goods in the earlier regime, which becomes service in the present regime. उसके लिए कोई transitional benefit नहीं दिया गया.
Yes,
in
I
fact,
think we
इस
also
जगह
need
से
to
तो
check
काफी सारी
SGST
प्लानिंग भी
law.
निकली थी.
हाँ, इनफैक्ट मतलब लोगों ने टू बी वेरी फ्रैंक, यस, जहाँ पे टैक्स रेट कम आ रहा था, दे एक्चुअली एग्जीक्यूटेड दिस ट्रांजैक्शन प्रायर टू 1770. Yes. Somebody
Yes, I
was saying-
think we also need to check 142(11) for SGST law.
Fortunately और unfortunately, विनम जी सेम लिखे हुए हैं दोनों. जैसे यहाँ पर 12 के लिए VAT रेफर किया है और 13 के लिए फाइनेंस एक्ट रेफर किया है. Exactly state law says so.
I think there was some difference in model law and the law later came on. So for
जो
the SGST
actual law
is
है
concerned.
देख लीजिए, वही मुझे तो जैसा याद है.
Correct. But again, my purpose of bringing it here, if the levy is such which is subject to transition provision, repeal and saving, and we could not find the answer under the normal levy 9(1), in my view, in that case, I would say that levy probably in that case is not clear. It is ambiguous, and hence in that case, one can take a view by saying that it does not fall under 9(1).
Yashji,
Yes.
Gurjeet Singh Bholar here.
Yes.
So can I request you to go to the slide which you have for 9(1), where
Yes.
you have added those tables, please, sir?
Absolutely, sir. This is slide on 9(1), sir.
Yeah, so you're regarding this deemed sales under VAT, the premise which you are presenting is that if time of supply is not covered under 9(1), then the charging section is not complete in itself. So the transactions will go out of it. Because time of supply is not covered under section.
Sorry, sir. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm just interrupting. I'm not talking about time of supply. Rather, on the contrary, I am saying just because of time of supply provisions is of the view that it is leviable to or it is liable to GST. I am saying that whatever 2 lakh rupees per month that person is receiving, that is just a procrastination of or delay in the collection which is taking place. But the event as such of that sale has already happened prior to 1/7/2017, and hence that is why there is no supply as such which is happening now. It is only the collection of it which is being done at after implementation of GST, and hence it is not covered.
I was just wondering about the block which you have mentioned, time of supply with rate notification. When you were covering this also, I was going through that repeatedly. I could not find any reference to time. I was asking that I was thinking I'll ask you later that this subsection 1 talks about value at the rate. So why instead of value you have written time of supply here?
Absolutely, sir. So very, very valid point. Time of supply, because that the moment at which I have to look at the rate notification, at what point of time I would look at the rate notification, for that I have basically referred it here. I have taken that along with an example. So maybe as and when that situation would come, I would do that. But I have understood your question. You're saying, why have I referred to time here? I'll take that part when we would talk about the rate notifications.
Yes, yeah, I'm coming. With reference to your query, I'm just wondering because you were saying if levy section is dependable on some other section, like you said, some other section is time of supply, it becomes a continuous supply, or the invoices are raised every month, then the collection happens like this. But the event has happened before that. So this section is not talking about the event. Is that what you are saying?
No, I'm saying this section is actually talking about the event here. There is absolutely no problem. Okay, let me bring it here. Actually, the point is this 9 is about levy and collection. It has 2 aspects to that. First, levy is absolutely on the taxable event. The taxable event has to happen under GST. However, once we have decided and determined without any doubt the taxable event is under GST, then the collection is also says that it has been prescribed in the manner the way collection would be done. So what I'm trying to say, when I would look at the rate notification, I would not only look at the rate notification once, only at the time when the tax was being was leviable. At that point of time, let's say my transaction was not leviable to tax or it was exempted, but the nature is such that collection of that has been procrastinated for whatever reason, but the supply has happened under GST. Then I would look at the time of supply provisions, and at that point of time, what is the relevant date? I have to go back again and check the rate. That's what basically I was trying to bring here by writing time of supply.
Yes,
okay,
can we
sir,
look
please carry on, sir. I think the time would be of essence here also, because I believe a lot of it is to be covered. Sorry, ma'am, I interrupted. Yes, sir, please carry on.
Yes, one point, not much. See, this sentence is using collected in such manner as may be prescribed. So are we not looking that liability to pay tax is deferred from the section? The levy is there under 9, but the liability to pay tax is decided by section 12 and 13. So that's why the wordings are used as collected in such manner. So I think we have to read, and the word they have used as and. So along with the rate of tax, we also have to look the liability to pay tax that is defined in collected in such manner. So I think that is what the time of supply with rate notification can be.
That's what exactly I'm trying to say, madam, that this rate,
so I
refer back again and again.
So I was just trying to read that and. So and when you have said, so I think time of supply with rate notification, right?
Right. I think I have been pointed this out correctly that I'm overshooting my time on this topic, but I'm sorry, Aroopji. I'm basically I have.
We have had some discussion. I think that adds value to everyone. Yeah, we can continue. No problem.
Yeah, Arup sir, I don't think participants would mind the time. It is only Yash sir's how he considers.
Yes.
How much time he is having.
No, it is my pleasure. Okay. Now let's come to next aspect, that it says that the value has to be as per the provision of section 15. Right? When we look at 15, all of us aware, I would not again go into detail. 15.1 talks about price actually paid or payable. and that is a sole consideration. Parties unrelated, first of all, identify through it. Then 4 says if you cannot determine as per 1, then you have to go to the determine as per the manner which is prescribed. We'll come to what is prescribed also. And then subsection 5, which talks about if you cannot determine as per 1 and 4, or rather on the contrary, it says irrespective of what is written in 1 and 4, in respect of certain supplies which are notified, the determination of value has to be as per the manner which is prescribed. Technically, when we read it in simple terms, it has to be through the rules. So that means in terms of measure of tax also, the levy is absolutely clear. It refers to 15. And 15 also is very systematic to say that you go to 15.1. If not possible, then go to 4. And both of them, 1 and 4, are superseded in terms of what is mentioned in subsection 5. Now, when we look at this, let's look at one more issue here. That in terms through my valuation, if at all, can there be a case if, let's say, I have clear valuation, still whether my levy would persist or not? So let's take an example. Let's say there is a supplier who is in India. Let's say the receiver is also in India. And let's say both of them have agreed that I, as a supplier, have to execute a works contract. And the value of that is, let's say, 20 crore rupees. Okay. That works contract needs to be executed outside India. So let's say all the attributes of immovability are there. We are not disputing that. Now, in respect of that, obviously, we know in terms of works contract, there is one transfer of property in goods along with the execution of the contract. In respect of the goods which are required, there is going to be an out and out transfer, let's say from country X to country Y. Country Y is that country where the execution would happen. So I am sitting in India, I would actually buy goods from country X and deliver it to the site which is in country Y. And let's say the value of that is 10 crore rupees. And then the people from India would actually go to country Y to do the execution work. And that is also for 10 crore rupees. So I have clear value identification on 20 crores, how it is being done. 10 for in terms of goods and 10 in terms of services. Obviously, together it is for the execution of, for construction of an immovable property. Simple question, is it covered within the levy provision? If yes, it is covered, the tax has to be on 10 crore rupees or 20 crore rupees. The question, I'm sure all of you would have understood. The catch in the issue is that one aspect of the works contract for which I have a clear value, one aspect of that is covered in Schedule 3. And we know what is Schedule 3. That is, Schedule 3 is where supply of goods from a place in a non-taxable territory to another place in a non-taxable territory without such goods entering into India. So there is actually goods which are not coming into India from country X to country Y, they are being moved there, but it is part of an overall contract for execution of the or construction of an immovable property. Is this leviable to tax? And if yes, what is going to be the measure? Again, we are restricting ourselves only to section 9. We might have to refer to other provisions also. Okay. So Soumya ji is saying 10 crores for installation would be taxable. At least on the aspect of 10 crores of material portion, what I understand from Soumya ji, she is saying that it is not taxable at all, or it is not covered within the levy because it is a Schedule 3 aspect. Any other answer? Somebody would like to unmute and say something?
Yes, can you repeat the second part of the question?
Second part of the question. The question, first, the transaction is taxable or not because it is a works contract which has two aspects. Material supplied out and out, but obviously used for execution of works contract, and services from India to outside India, but supplier receiver both are in India.
So both supplier and recipient are outside India. Supplier and recipient of services.
Both are in India. This is not a case of export. We are not saying it is export or anything of that sort. We are saying, is the levy intact here? Is there a problem in the levy here? Because one aspect of the transaction is such, which is covered by Schedule 3.
But yes,
we have
Schedule 3. Yeah, so Schedule 3 is only for goods, right? I'm going from one non-taxable territory to another. Right. So here I'm not supplying goods. I'm rather giving the supply of works contract service.
Okay. So Aroopji's point is, why am I only looking at Schedule 3 into isolation? If it works contract service, I should not look at into Schedule 3 into isolation. Okay. So Soumya is of the view that it is taxable, but only 10 crores is taxable. I think from Aroopji, what I understand, whole 20 crores has to be leviable to tax. Nitinji is saying supplied services related to goods are out of GST ambit, but here is supply of goods and services both. And hence probably that is why you're saying that it would be taxable. Okay. Now, in case anybody has any other point, or else I'll share whatever I understand from this, and then again you may contradict to what I'm saying. Okay. We have a definition of works contract which is very clear. If there has to be yes, somebody.
नहीं मतलब अपने आप ही रिंग थोड़ी कर रहा है.
Okay. Okay. So there has to be transfer of
Yeah,
property
please
and
continue.
goods
Please
when you.
continue.
Yeah, no problem, sir. There has to be transfer of property and goods when you look at works contract in the execution of such contract. That's the definition of works contract. So that either in form of a goods or any other form, there has to be transfer of property and goods. The goods have to start, and then the end result may be immovable property or as goods, whatever be the case. Schedule 3, we understand supply of goods from a place in non-taxable territory to another place in non-taxable territory. Without entering into India, it is treated neither as supply of goods nor as supply of service. So that's very important aspect, that at specific element is neither treated as supply of goods nor as supply of service. Then we have, excuse me, we have Schedule 2. And Schedule 2 talks about composite supply. We know works contract is deemed to be a composite supply. And when we say it is deemed to be composite supply, it shall be treated as supply of service once it is a works contract defined in 2119 and deemed composite. Now let's look at section 7, and that's what basically I wanted to bring here, that I might have valuation here, but valuation is subject to the subject matter. That is, the measure of tax is subject to what is my subject matter. Now let's look at section 7. Section 7 subsection 1A says, where certain activities or transactions constitute a supply in accordance with provision of subsection 1, they shall be treated either as supply of goods or as supply of service as referred in Schedule 2. Mind you, works contract is a service arising from Schedule 2, and Schedule 2 is arising from 1A. And 1A says that something which is a supply as per subsection 1, then only we would look at whether it is a supply of service or supply of goods. Now, before you read 7.1, you have 7.2. 7.2 says notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1. So 7.2 is actually notwithstanding subsection 1. And it says activities or transactions which are specified in Schedule 3 shall be treated neither as supply of goods nor as supply of service. And that's the problem here. Now the problem is that 7 subsection 2 actually supersedes what is mentioned in 7.1. And once one aspect of the transaction is by virtue of 7.2 gets out of the treated as either as supply of goods or as supply of service, technically in this contract, I have one aspect of the transaction which is left only as supply of service. The another aspect is neither as supply of goods nor as supply of service. Then the only aspect which is left, that is the service portion of it. Only that aspect can I cover in 7.1. And if I do that only in 7.1 and then I read 7.1a. 7.1a says when the whole transaction is a supply of goods or supply of service or both as per 7.1, then only I would look at 7.1a. And there the problem arises that one aspect of the transaction is neither supply of goods and not supply of service. Hence the whole transaction is not falling under 7.1. Once the whole transaction is not falling under 7.1, I am not actually falling under 7.1a, and hence it is not becoming a deemed composite supply, and hence it is not a works contract. So in my understanding, there is a problem here in the scope of supply. Just because I have a 10 crore value of service which is mentioned here, it does not have a nexus with the subject matter of tax, that what are we trying to tax, because one aspect of that is not a supply of service. And in my understanding, this whole transaction gets out of the levy provisions because there is no mechanism as such which has been given out that from a works contract, how can you identify that particular aspect of a transaction which is neither a supply of goods nor a supply of service. I don't know if I was able to put forth my point clearly.
Well, I think it's a wonderful insight, yes, Ji. I think things to be pondered upon, even after the session.
Just to add or support the point which you said, the Gannon-Dunkele first one, 1958, exactly says this thing. You cannot artificially divide this. And
Right.
for that purposes, to overcome from that judgment, there was a constitutional amendment which talks about specifically for the levy of tax on sale or purchase of the goods, defining this one. So in my humble opinion, that cannot be applied here. So what Yash says is remains valid. Absolutely.
Okay. Now we have, let me first take the another important aspect which I wanted to bring here. Then probably if the time permits and everybody agrees, we'll come to this notification prescription and how do we interpret rate notification, again from the perspective of levy only, because that also according to me is very interesting. But let's now jump to first taxable person. Now this is also very interesting. When you look at taxable person, it is defined under 2107 as somebody is registered or liable to be registered under section 22 or 24. And then we have a definition of registered person also, which says somebody is registered under section 25, but does not include a person who has a UIN. So we are talking about somebody who is already registered is definitely a taxable person. And somebody who is liable to be registered under 22 or 24 is also a taxable person. Now, let me come back to the original question which I asked, a little different question. 9.1, which all of us read just now, is it only about taxing outward supplies, or does this in its circumference includes taxing inward supplies also? 9.1 is only in context of outward supplies, or does this include taxing inward supplies also?
In my view, it will be for both.
Inward, yes.
Okay, it is from both. Okay. Okay. Let's look at again.
Yes, is it possible? Section 9 screen पर आ सके एक बार.
हाँ, बिल्कुल आ सकता है. Yes, this is 9.1. Okay. Sorry, my screen is.
So it doesn't say made by whom.
Yeah, absolutely correct. So I think all the answers which we get, in fact, I was also of this view that includes both, that the gambit is huge. It talks about both inward and outward supplies both. But let's see.
But supply, the scope of supply says made or agreed to be made. So need to correlate with section 7.
Correct. Now, remember I asked one more question, that when we would look at the scope of supply and the ingredients of supply, from whose perspective we would look at it, and we said we would only look at it from the supplier's perspective. Please keep that answer in mind. That was the majority answer. I'm not saying that everybody has said that, but that was the majority answer.
But I think Yashji has just been logged out because of it.
Yes,
Let's just wait for 1 minute. Yeah, just join.
Yes.
दरवाजा नहीं खुलेगा चूतिया साला.
Yes, I'm sorry I was disconnected.
नहीं ठीक है, जीएसटी के प्रोग्राम में थोड़ा ग्लिच नहीं होगा तो फिर जमता नहीं.
Sir, you have to allow me screen sharing, sir.
Yes, I'm just doing it. I'm just doing that.
Thank you. Okay, I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah.
Okay, so 22 talks about every supplier making a taxable supply of goods or service having an aggregate turnover beyond 20 lakhs. Let's not talk about 20 lakhs right now. Look at definition of supplier. Supplier, they're not talking about taxable person. This thing tax supplier means a person supplying said goods or services and includes such agent. So somebody who's actually supplying goods and services, irrespective he's a taxable person or not, even if he's just a person who is not required to be registered, still he is a supplier. Okay. Now we have definition of outward supply. It means a taxable person means supply goods or service of both, whether by sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal, or any other mode, made or agreed to be made by such person. Who is such person? He is a taxable person in course and furtherance of business. So that means outward supply is in context of a taxable person. Supplier can be any person, and the person who is required to take the registration is actually the supplier. Up till now, there is no problem. Then you look at definition of output tax. The definition of output tax in relation to a taxable person means tax charged under this act. Chargeable, not charged rather. Tax chargeable under this act. So that's very important. Taxable person in respect of tax chargeable under this act on taxable supply of goods or service of both made by him or by his agent. And read the aspect which is underlined, excludes a tax payable by him on a reverse charge basis. So somebody who is a supplier, and if in case he has to pay any tax on a reverse charge basis, that is excluded from the definition of output tax. Up till now also there is no problem because we do not use the word output tax under the levy provisions. Now from this, if you draw the matrix looks like this. Output tax means tax chargeable under this act. So that means what is chargeable under this act? Obviously for that we would go to levy provisions. It has to be payable only by a taxable person. That means output tax can only be paid by a taxable person. And taxable person is supplier who is registered or liable to be registered. And supplier who is registered is basically supplier making a supply. And that supply has to be for taxable goods or services. So all in all, when you read this and you try to draw basically from various nooks and corners, you realize, at least what I could understand, 9(1) is only in context of outward tax or output tax, outward supply and output tax. It is not in context of the inward supply. That's what I could understand. And that is why 9(1) is a levy provision followed by the collection that takes place. So that means all the provisions, when you're looking at it, that is from the supplier's perspective, all the conditions which are satisfying are from the supplier's perspective, and the taxable person, at least in 9(1), when we are reading it, we are reading it from a supplier's perspective. We are not reading it from a recipient's perspective. Any contrary views to this?
Sir, I agreed with you, and it's also because we have a specific provision under 9(3) and 9(4) for RCM cases.
Correct. And that's what basically I want all of us to now. I want to take all to RCM
But
there. That is why
9394 is not for levy, na? They talks about only collection.
So
Isn't it?
Jatinji has actually, that's what basically I was saying. Now, if you say this, and what Jatinji is saying, if 9(3) and 9(4) are not levy provisions, and there it is only determining the collection that from whom the tax would be required to be paid, that means when we are satisfying all the conditions of a levy, as which I said, it cannot be flexible, it cannot be ambiguous, then that means we have to read all the provisions from the supplier's perspective. So let's say I am a transporter and I'm not required to take a registration, and you have to pay tax under reverse charge. And I am specifically from the law, I am excluded from taking a registration by virtue of a notification which has been issued under 23. And 23 overrides 22. Then in that case, my levy, is my levy not failing there? And is all the recipients who are paying tax under reverse charge, technically they are not required to pay tax because that transaction is not leviable to tax, because supplier is not actually taxable person there under 9(1). So once supplier is not the taxable person under their 9(1), why is recipient being asked to make payment of tax? Because first levy has to be fixed, then only the burden can be shifted to any other person.
Yash,
Yes.
am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
My question is, a person who is exempted from registration via section 23,
Yes.
does he becomes a non-taxable person?
he is not a taxable person because he is not registered or required to be registered.
Yeah, but will I not read required to be registered in this sense that where he is required to be registered, why 22 or 24?
Allow me just a minute. Allow me interruption because
Yeah, please.
it's a very good point to be interrupted. I'm just trying, if Yash allow, I'm just trying to change the facts so that we will be on pointed. Instead of this transporter, let us come to agriculturist. Some agriculturist who has produced some crop which is taxable, he is going for that maybe which is under RCM. Now you may continue with your arguments on the pointed thing. Correct? No?
Correct. So that's what Jatin is saying, that 23(1)(b) says that following person shall not be liable to be registered, namely an agriculturist to the extent supply of produce out of cultivation of land. Now, when we were reading 9(1), and we said that it is written from a supplier's perspective, whether that agriculturist is a taxable person. If he is
number
not,
one. Number two, there can be another example when the supplier is having a less than 20 lakh turnover.
Correct.
No exemption is required. No exemption is required. He is not a taxable person.
Correct. I would welcome contrary views here because I am just raising questions from my side. I'm sure all of us are paying tax in the reverse charge. But what we are paying under reverse charge, are we really required to pay, or is there is some error in drafting here?
Sir, subsection 1, when it talks about the taxable person, it just says that the tax will be paid by the taxable person. It does not talk about that it is leviable only on the taxable person. The payment has to be made. And when we are talking about levy and collection, should we limit ourselves to subsection 1 only? Because if we, let's say, talk about subsection 3, it says the recipient will be the person who will be liable for paying the tax.
Absolutely,
so
sir.
That recipient is replaced as the taxable person in 9(1).
Yeah, let me now,
So that is
absolutely what you said. I will hold you here, and you used a phrase which said that the recipient is replacing that supplier here as a taxable person, correct? Now that means to replace a supplier, first of all, supplier has to be the taxable person, then only he can be replaced. If the supplier at all is not a taxable person, either we say that either the supplier or recipient in a transaction, either of them can be taxable person. Don't limit the discussion on levy from the perspective to say that, first of all, you read all of this from a supplier's perspective. Because if we say so, sir, then in that case, when we talk about in course of business or for a consideration or anything of that sort, then should I not read it from a recipient's perspective also? The question which I asked at the inception. Because if I'm reading all other, yes.
Yeah, no, please complete. Sorry.
If I'm reading all other provisions from a supplier's perspective, consideration, supply, what is goods, what is service, what is business, and then I am saying that all of that is satisfied, absolutely okay. But supplier is not a taxable person. So what? It doesn't matter. Now bring it to the recipient. And that's what Mathuram Agarwal and Govind Saran Gangasaran said, that one of the pillars of taxation is to determine very clearly in the levy that who is the person who is liable to pay the tax. Once the levy is on the supplier, then through a notification, through whatever provision of the act, that levy can be, or that liability to make payment of tax can be shifted to another person. But once in the levy only, it is not clear that who is that person who is leviable, who is charged with the tax. Then in that case, in my view, there is a problem to read this in this manner, unless we say that 9(3) and 9(4) are part of levy.
So one thing, all the subsections have to be read together. We don't need to go into that part of interpretation, but just coming to the levy part only. So levy includes what is the charge. So charge is on supplies. Then the measure of tax, that is on the value at the rate specified, and then how it will be collected. It will be collected in the manner, and who will pay? It will be paid by the taxable person. So levy is not on the taxable person. The charge is already there. The measure of tax is there. And then the collection and the payment, that is on the taxable person. It is not that the levy is on the taxable person. Levy is on the supply itself. And when we come to the collection and payment part, then it is that subsection 3 says that instead of the taxable person, which is mentioned in subsection 1, that payment would be that collection and payment will be on the recipient. It does not violate the charging part. Charging remains on the supply and supply by the supplier only. That will be my view, sir.
Okay, sir. Point taken, sir.
I support this point for
Yes, I'll
another
just
reason
take
that
one.
should I continue?
I'll just take, yes, I'll just take 30 seconds, just one.
Yes,
One, yeah. So just with the, as we all know that, so as we all know that today's session is a lengthy session, section 9. So with the permission of the House, we'll be extending the session by maybe another 15 minutes till 10:45, if it is okay with Yashji.
Yeah, absolutely, sir.
Yeah. So thanks to all the members for, staying put and listening to the wonderful delivery. Thank you. Yeah, Yashji, please continue.
Yeah, Vishal, I think
Yeah,
you were saying
so yeah, I was saying this, that I support what Bullarji said for one more reason, that if we read subsection 3 and 4, it only says that the responsibility of payment is shifted to the recipient. So, drawing an analogy, even in subsection 1, only the responsibility was put on the taxable person, which eventually is the supplier. And subsection 3 and 4 is only shifting the responsibility of making the payment to the recipient. But this is not the same case in case of subsection 5. Maybe if we are coming on that separately, we can discuss on that.
Correct.
But as of now, as far as 1, 3, and 4 are concerned, I support this view. And anyways, indirect taxes are never a levy created on a person. All indirect taxes are levy created on certain transactions. So here also subsection 1 makes it very clear. The levy is only on the supplies. And then subsection 1 says payment is by the taxable person who is now the supplier. And subsection 3 and 4 says only the responsibility of paying is shifted to recipient. This
Correct.
is my understanding.
So I will rectify, I think probably a word which I use maybe create a confusion from my side. I am not saying that levy is on the person. I am saying when we are reading the levy, all 3 ingredients, they have to be satisfied in one go. That is subject matter of tax, intrastate supply goods and services, rate as coming from the notification, and the person who is chargeable with the tax. So the person who is chargeable with the tax as per the provision of the act is the taxable person. And when we read 9.1 is very clear, it is on the outward side of it. In fact, when you read the provisions of reverse charge, the definition of reverse charge rather, before going to 9.3 and 9.4, let's read 298. Reverse charge means liability to pay tax by the recipient of supply, goods or service or both instead of the supplier of such goods or service or both under subsection 3 and subsection 4 and 9, or under subsection 3 or subsection 4 of the section 5 of the IGST Act. It shifts from supplier to recipient. Now, the question is, how can something be shifted from supplier to recipient when supplier at the first place was not chargeable with tax at all? All of us are saying we are shifting the responsibility. But first of all, there has to be responsibility on the supplier, and that responsibility should come from the levy provision. If that responsibility is not coming from the levy provisions at all, what are we going to shift? Are we saying that responsibility was always on the recipient? It was never on the supplier. If that being the case, the manner in which this definition of reverse charge is written, it is not aligned to that thought process, number 1. Number 2, let's look at the meaning of word input tax. And when you read input tax in relation to registered person means CT, ST, IT, tax charged on such supply and includes, and then you read the tax payable. If that would have been the case, they could have used the word tax chargeable under the provision of subsection 3 and subsection 4 of section 9. They are saying tax payable. Payable comes later only when the determination has happened, and determination can happen only under 9.1. And for having a determination under 9.1, when we read Govind Saran and Mathuram Agarwal, both of them clearly say that who is the person chargeable with tax has to come out very clearly. Okay. Next, inward supply. Inward supply in relation to a person shall mean receipt of goods and services of both, whether by purchase, acquisition, or any other means, with or without consideration. So effectively, that means whatever we pay tax under reverse charge, it is an input tax, and that input tax is on the inward supply. Vis-a-vis whatever we read in 9.1 was an output tax, and it was on the outward supply. And reverse charge is shifting the liability there. I'm just to conclude my point, and then probably again we can open for any further points to add to this. What Vishal said in terms of this 9.5, actually supplements to, or at least in my view, it supplements to the view basically which I am proposing before the group. You look at 9.5. 9.5 says government on the recommendation of the council by notification specify categories of services the tax on interstate supply of which shall be paid by electronic commerce operator as if such services are supplied through it, and all the provision of this act shall apply to such electronic commerce operator as if he is a supplier liable for paying tax. In this case, it has been clearly mentioned that this is, in fact, there is a Delhi High Court judgment also, I think in case of Uber, which says that this is not a tax under reverse charge. There is no shifting happening. We are just deeming that the supplier in this case would be the electronic commerce operator, and then whatever provisions are applicable on that particular supplier, they would be applicable on the electronic commerce operator as the supplier. So in this case, the levy is intact. The levy is not getting affected here. So that's one of my views in this case, that probably the manner in which the reverse charge is written, there is a scope at least to argue wherever somebody has not paid tax on reverse charge, that that transaction was not leviable to tax at all, and that is why tax under reverse charge was not paid.
Yes, I have a counter question to this.
Yes.
So when we are reading supply, we have certain conditions to be satisfied, one of them being in the course and furtherance of business.
Correct.
So when we talk about RCM supplies,
Correct.
who is this, means on whom is this condition applicable, whether the supplier of those supplies or the recipient of those supplies?
Yeah, I think that we discussed this, and at least the majority view, or at least what I understood the majority view was, it has to be read from the supplier's perspective. So somebody who is making a supply which is not from in course and furtherance of his business, technically through a backdoor entry, government cannot tax that by saying that the burden has been shifted from supplier to the recipient.
Okay, sorry, I was not logged in at that time. My view on that would be that that particular condition has to be read from the viewpoint of the recipient.
Okay. Okay.
And also
Why
when
so?
you just
Why so?
referred this section 9. Sir, for
Vishal,
the
why
simple
so?
reason.
Reason?
So in that case, otherwise then we need not come to 9.3 and 9.4 in majority of the cases, because in majority of the cases, the supplier may not be satisfying the condition of in the course or furtherance of business. Taking the simple example of sale of old jewelry, though that was later on, there was a lot of dispute, then they came up with a clarification. Similarly, in case of transfer of these TDRs, there may not be the RCM itself will fail because the first condition that the supplier should be in the business.
That's what we are saying, Vishal.
सो आपको जो फैक्ट्स है उनके ऊपर लॉ अप्लाई करना है, या फिर जो लॉ है लॉ को फैक्ट्स के हिसाब से अपने आप रीड करना है? Are you getting my point?
That is correct, sir. I take your point.
The law has to be interpreted. The law has to be interpreted as per interpretational aids. जो जिस तरीके से लॉ को इंटरप्रेट किया जाता है, नॉट एज पर कि फैक्ट्स ऐसे हैं इसलिए सरकार ने ऐसा नोटिफिकेशन या सर्कुलर लेके आ गया, इसके लिए हम लॉ को ऐसा पढ़ लें।
ट्रू।
अगर सरकार गलत नोटिफिकेशन लेके आई है, गलत प्रोविजन लेके आई है, तो इसका मतलब डजंट मीन कि लॉ को हम दूसरी तरीके से पढ़ना स्टार्ट कर दें।
They agreed, but actually I was interpreting the supply conditions from the perspective of recipient in that particular case.
Actually, this is what my question is. Why from the recipient angle? This is the only precise question. Why this business aspect is to be read from the recipient angle?
Sir, my understanding is because any indirect tax, be it this GST or earlier excise or current customs also, is not on a tax levied or leviable also on a person. It is always on a transaction.
Okay.
And when it is transaction, then my reading of these all levy sections of indirect taxes is, then it has to be read qua, means the conditions should be read qua the person who is liable to pay. Let us say in this respect, I'm talking about the business condition.
उसके लिए जो गोविंद शरण गंगा शरण यश ने रेफर किया था, यश रेफर्ड गोविंद शरण गंगा शरण for specifically for that. So to this point, I am absolutely in agreement with you that this levy is on a particular maybe a transaction or maybe an activity point. But then the Supreme Court says you have to come out with a clear picture that who will pay the tax on this particular transaction. So when the levy 9(1) is specifically saying that it is there on outside, that means on supplier, fine. And the scope of supply you are reading from section 7, which gives probably a single meaning, that it has to be seen from the supplier's point of view. as the other clauses of definition clauses which discuss which is discussed on today itself. Fine. So in that case, we need to understand why in a particular other kind of transaction, we need to understand supply from the recipient side. Their taxability or liability to pay tax may be on the recipient. This can be provided by the legislature, but वो supply में कहाँ provide किया? Scope of supply में.
Right.
ये चीज scope
Sir,
of
in
supply
that-
से आना चाहिए था ना?
Sir, in that case, sir, all import transactions will be then outside GST, sir.
No.
वो फिर अलग line में चले जाएंगे.
For import,
नहीं, but-
don't refer import today because we're only on section 9 of CGST.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
May
sir.
I, sir? Sir,
Absolutely,
Jatin, sir, just when referring to those SC judgments regarding this, he used the phrase, the court has said, who is the person liable to tax? So whether the court is saying who is the person liable to be taxed, liable to pay the tax, that is to be identified, or you're the premise, the view you are sharing and the view I was putting forward, it was the differentiation was that your view says that the person who is chargeable to tax
Correct,
should
chargeable,
be identified,
chargeable.
and my view was that the person who should be liable to pay the tax, that should be identified. So a rereading of
same.
those SC judgments is required. What is the requirement? What are they saying? So these could be two different phrases which will then change the meaning of the discussions also.
Correct.
Agreed,
Jatin,
sir. Same point from my.
See, one thing, एक तो मैं थोड़ी देर के लिए डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया था, तो मैं पूरा डिस्कशन नहीं सुन पाया था विशाल से पहले वाला. So anyway, I think लास्ट में एक पॉइंट आ रहा था लेवी एंड कलेक्शन को लेके कि लेवी इंक्लूड्स काइंड ऑफ कलेक्शन, करेक्ट ना? शायद ये उसी से एमिनेट हो रहा है.
correct, absolutely.
Is it? So I think इसके ऊपर तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट सेटल्ड है. इसमें कहाँ डाउट है कि वो वजीर सुल्तान यू कैन रेफर सुप्रीम कोर्ट वो लेवी एंड कलेक्शन आर एब्सोल्युटली टू डिफरेंट थिंग्स.
Actually, levy for the collection follows levy. First of all, we have to identify the
We have to
levy.
identify levy.
Yeah, we have to identify levy. Then collection of that can be, it can be procrastinated. The burden of that can be shifted to any other person. All of that can happen. But you cannot basically tinker with the levy provision. So when we talk about indirect tax, the chargeability, when we are looking at it, that provisions come from the levy, that who is the person who is chargeable with tax. And that's where 9(1) says it has to be taxable person. And we refer to that taxable person when we're reading from the supplier's perspective. Once done that, then you shift it to recipient, there is no problem. But somebody who is not registered, because under GST, it is the chargeability is not on the supplier. The chargeability is on the taxable person. And we read this. In fact, on your screen also you can see there is difference between supplier and a taxable person. Every supplier may not be a taxable person, but every taxable person, as mentioned under 22(1), would be a supplier.
Correct. And I think analogy one of the learned member was saying, please mind the concept is same, but it has to, what Govind Chand Gangashar says, it has to come out from a statute. You cannot assume it. You cannot assume that this will be the person liable to pay tax or maybe a taxable person. So it has to come out from the statute.
Jatin bhai, myself and Gurji ji are on one particular difference of praise. We are reading the Govind sir and Ganga sir judgment in this manner that the judgment says that the person liable to pay should be identifiable, which according to me and Gurji ji is identifiable in 9(1) as supplier and 314 as recipient. But I think Yash is opening that the decision says the person who is chargeable to tax is identifiable. I think there is a difference between chargeable and person liable to pay. I think 9(1), 9(3), 9(4) are creating the responsibility of making the person liable to pay.
Okay.
I hope I'm able to make my point clear.
Okay. Let me.
I think yeah, we have last 5 minutes. So
Yeah, last 5 minutes. Last 5 minutes.
Yashvi, if you want to, you have to provide more inputs. You're welcome. At the end, I'll request that I'll wish to take you back to that section 142(11) clause B and C whenever you find time.
Right, sir. So, can I just first complete what has been allotted?
Yes, sir. It's at your discretion whenever you.
Right. So this point, I think we're fairly discussed. Though I had other points to add it to this, but probably we would be running out of time here. I'll just want to take one more thing here. It says rate of tax as may be notified, highest 20% as notified, and the collection in the manner as prescribed. So they're using two words, notification and prescription. When you look at prescribed, we have section 2 subsection 87 which basically says prescribed by rules made under this act or on the recommendation of the council, and the notifications it says something which is published in the official gazette. Mind you, the rules are also basically brought through a notification only. So every notification may not be a prescription of rule, but the prescription of rule actually would come through a publication in an official gazette, that is notification. That means we have a difference between a notification and a rule here. 1 or 2 points in terms of collection which is important, that though it says it has to be prescribed, in my understanding, prescribed does not mean that it has to be always through the rule. Though definitely it cannot be through a notification only, but if something which has been made part, the collection mechanism which has been made part of other provisions of the act, then in that case also I understand that the prescription is happening through the provisions only, need not necessarily go into the rules only, and hence that is why one cannot say that collection can be challenged in that case. That is number 1. Number 2, rate is coming through a notification. Now, I specifically wanted to bring these 2 notifications here for the benefit of all the members, just to bring out that these rate notifications which we read 1/17 and 11/17, 1/17 for supply of goods and 11/17 for supply of service, both of them, when you would read the provisions, it comes from section 9(1) of the CGST Act. The manner in which you will interpret these 2 notifications is absolutely different. Matlab, you read the initial paragraph of 1/17 and you read the paragraph along with the explanation given for 11/17. Very quickly, I'll just take all of you through this. 1/17 says in exercise of powers conferred under subsection 1 of section 9, and 15(5) is also referred, but that is not something which we have to discuss today. So conferred under subsection 1 of section 9 of the central government on the recommendation of the CGST Act, the central government on the recommendation of the council hereby notifies rate of central tax of. Then you look at, they have referred to 5 or 6, 7 schedules. Okay. When they have referred to 6, 7 schedules, they say 2.5% respect of goods specified in schedule 1 and so on and so forth. And then they're referring to appended to this notification herein referred to as the schedule. It shall be levied on intrastate supplies of goods, the description of which is specified in corresponding entry in column 3 of the said schedule, falling under the tariff item, subheading, heading, and chapter as the case may be specified in corresponding entry in the column 2 of the said schedule. So it refers to description in column 3 and this heading, chapter, tariff, and all of that in schedule 2. Now we have, after this, in the same rate notification, we have an explanation which explains what is tariff item, subheading, heading, and chapter. And most importantly, they say that the rules of interpretation for the first schedule to the customs tariff, which is applicable in terms to the section and chapter notes and general explanatory notes to the first schedule, shall apply to the interpretation of this notification. Meaning thereby, whenever you're looking at the classification for the purpose of identifying the rate, how that rate notification has to be read, 1/17. For that, we have settled rules, and those rules needs to be followed. That is the rules of interpretation along with this chapter note and general explanatory notes. When you would go there, you would realize that supremacy has been given to what is mentioned or how to interpret a subheading, heading, and a chapter. So in terms of 1/17, what comes under a chapter, heading, subheading, what are the chapter notes, what are the section notes, all of them are very relevant. The classification and the rate determination cannot be on the basis of description of the goods given in column number 3 of notification 1/17. That's what I want to bring here for notification 1/17. The description mentioned in column number 3, in my view, is of no relevance or a least relevance, but the manner in which you would identify the chapter, heading, and a subheading as per the rules of interpretation is relevant. However, when you read 11/17 for services, which refers to 9(1) and other section, I would just read the relevant part. Notifies that central tax on intrastate supply of services of description as specified in column 3 of the table below, falling under chapter, section, and heading of the scheme of classification as specified in column 2, shall be levied at a rate as specified in corresponding entry number 4, subject to conditions as may be specified in corresponding entry 5 of the said table. Here, there is no reference to schedule, which was given in schedule number in notification number 1. Number 2, it also refers to chapter, section, and heading. But the problem is 11/17 does not bring in itself the manner of interpreting this chapter, section, and heading. So the view which comes out while you're reading this rate notification is whenever you are determining the classification of a service along with the rate, it is determinant on the basis of what is the description which is mentioned in schedule column number 3 of the rate notification. Once one is able to identify that primarily my service falls under column number 3 of the rate notification, then only I will go to the annexure, that annexure which is there along with the rate notification. I am bringing this because I just wanted to really, because if we will take this, it might take a little more time, but maybe when you will go back and from this perspective, when you will read a rate notification, the question which I could not find an answer up till today, that is in terms of a works contract service, which falls under notification 11/17, try to find out a rate that where a works contract service, which is not a construction. In works contract, we know that we have 14 types of activities which are mentioned. Out of 14, one of that is construction. If you remove construction and for all other types of activities which are part of a works contract service, try and find the rate. In my view, there would be some ambiguity in finding the rate, that what would be the applicable GST rate and appropriate classification for that works contract service. And again, that ambiguity which arises is because the manner in which the notification 11/17 is written. So that is, in my view, in terms of the levy is absolutely all right. The notification is also absolutely all right. But when you further go and try to basically interpret the notification, there I see that there is some challenge in interpreting that in terms of the way it is written. I think with this, probably I'll put an end to my monologue. It's been a wonderful interaction with all of you. I think somebody, Mr. Bhullar was saying something. Gurjeet ji was saying something.
Yeah. So Gurjeet sir, just for the paucity of time, will I end the session here and then maybe you'll take it offline with SG?
Yeah, absolutely no problem, sir. No problem.
Because it's only 10:48.
I was going to ask you only that what should be done, whatever you say, sir. You
No,
are the
sir.
commander.
I think we, the extent of value add we had in the session is visible from the requests that have been coming already for the video recording of this. So, people who had to miss because for some meeting or on, so they are also eager to listen to the portion they missed. So thank you very much. So I think with the permission of Gurjeet sir, I think we'll go ahead with the vote of thanks. So Yashi, I think vote of thanks would be a very small thing to say, because the kind of extent of research that you have done, and especially the thoughts that you have put in today in our mind. And with that, I'd also like to thank all the participants, Jatin ji, Vishal ji, Gurjeet sir, then Soumya ma'am, then Annapurna ma'am was also there. So everyone, maybe I'm missing somebody's name, but I'm missing somebody's name. So please do forgive me if I'm missing your name. But I say that today's was another wonderful session wherein we all have added value, and now we can put our festive season to use by thinking over this. Especially one thing, like we discussed that about whether it's from the recipient point of view or supplier point of view, or later on I was thinking when I'm supplying to government, I have to think it from both the point of view. Supplier is supplying, but when he's supplying to government authorities, then only it's 12%. Otherwise, it's 18%. So things are coming to my mind. Maybe this will give birth to another session where we'll have discussion solely on these aspects also. We'll have critical discussion on this. So Yasji, thank you so much for taking out time for all.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Arabji, just a 1 minute.
Yes, Chetanji, boliye.
Yes, bhai, if it is okay. Arabji, if it is something not planned for next Saturday, and if Yash is okay, let's carry this discussion on next Saturday also, if Yash is okay with it.
No, Chetanji, next Saturday we have already planned, because we are doing a session on DRC 01. So I'll discuss with Yash if he's okay. 28, we'll see his calendar.
Yeah.
So because we had planned. So we'll plan it accordingly because we are also asked other speakers about that. So we'll see the schedule and also speak to ESG. He'll see his calendar and then we'll discuss it. And I'm also eager to take this session. Like we have, Robot 2.0, so we'll have section 9 version 2.0.
No problem. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
next week we have the session of Arpit Haldia ji on the DR601 that we have received for 17, 18, 18, 19. Because there are a lot of questions from members what to do next. There are violations of limitation, there are violations of principle of natural justice. Because in the notice itself, it is mentioned that there is no date for personal hearing. So there are a lot of questions from members. So Arpit Haldia ji will be taking the session on next Saturday, 9 a.m. And about Vishalji's session, about Yashji's session, we'll just discuss with him and also the other speakers whom we had sought time on 28th. We'll discuss and we'll finalize the time.
no problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this wonderful discussion.
Am I audible, Roopji?
Suresh sir, boliye sir, aap to ekdam pura audible hai.
I'm just telling you that he has such a high standards in this in this talk. Really, Judge has today very high standards, sir, in this our group.
Sir,
And
with God's
one more
grace.
thing, and one more
Yes,
thing,
sir.
we should not say that it is session is concluded. It has to be concluded, yes. Huh? Please, so give him another chance to conclude it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, that's what Chetanji suggested.
Thank
We'll just
you.
speak to the other speakers from whom we have taken dates. We'll reshuffle the dates and we'll plan that accordingly.
And I am really delighted to hear Jatin Harjai ji, Vishal ji, and
Everybody, yes.
Namar ji. So really, our group is touching the sky, yeah?
Yes. Sir,
Thank you.
Suresh sir, with the grace of God, we have all the best speakers in India in
Thank
our
you.
group.
Thank you.
So
Thank
this
you.
really
Sir, I just request that this recording should not go to any of the department officials. Otherwise, they will get more feeders to shadow us with more notices.
right. No, the group. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Yash. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you, Roopji. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.